She was 10 years old, barefoot in the December snow, clutching a crying baby against her chest with frozen fingers that had stopped feeling hours ago. The infant's wails had grown weaker with each mile, and Grace Lawson knew what that meant. She'd watched her mother grow quiet the same way. The farmhouse ahead had smoke rising from its chimney. One last chance, one last door. She fell to her knees at the gate, her legs finally giving out, and whispered the only prayer she had left. Please, not her. Take me, but not her. Thank you for joining this story. If it touches your heart, please subscribe and comment with your city, so I can see how far Grace and Samuel's journey travels. Now, let their story begin. The gate hung crooked on its hinges, held together by wire and stubbornness. Grace Lawson stared at it through the blowing snow, her arms burning from the weight of the bundle pressed against her chest. Little Lily had stopped crying 10 minutes ago. That scared Grace more than the cold, more than the hunger, more than the 3 days of walking that had led her here. Quiet babies didn't mean sleeping babies. Quiet babies meant giving up babies. Don't you dare, Grace whispered against her sister's tiny head. Don't you dare leave me too. She shifted Lily higher, feeling the small body stir slightly. Still alive, still fighting. That was something. The farmhouse beyond the gate looked half dead itself. Paint peeling off the porch rails. Windows dark. A barn listing to one side like it was tired of standing. But smoke curled from the chimney thin and gray against the white sky. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant warmth. Warmth meant Lily might live another day. Grace pushed through the gate, the wire scraping against frozen wood. Her feet had gone numb, miles back, somewhere between the creek crossing and the abandoned barn where she'd spent last night. She didn't look down at them anymore. Didn't want to see what the cold had done. The walk to the porch felt like crossing an ocean. Each step was a battle, her legs threatening to buckle, her arms screaming for relief. Lily weighed almost nothing, 6 pounds of bone and skin and desperate breathing. But Grace's body had run out of strength to give. She climbed the porch steps. 1, 2, 3. Her fist found the door. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was pathetic, weak as a sparrow's heartbeat. Grace tried again, harder this time, and pain shot through her frozen knuckles. Please, she called out, her voice cracking. Please, is anyone there? Silence. Lily stirred against her chest, letting out a thin, reedy cry that barely qualified as sound. Grace's heart clenched. Shh, baby girl. Shh. Someone's coming. Someone's gonna help us. She didn't believe it. 3 days of walking, 3 days of knocking on doors, and nobody had helped. The church in Miller's Crossing had offered prayers, but no room. The general store owner had given her a hard biscuit and pointed her toward the county orphanage 60 miles east. A farmer's wife had chased her off with a broom, calling her a beggar and a thief. But Grace kept knocking anyway, because that's what Mama would have done. Keep going, baby girl. Keep fighting. Don't ever let them see you give up. The door swung open. A man stood there, tall and weathered, with gray-streaked hair and eyes the color of winter sky. He wore a wool shirt, half-buttoned, and his jaw was covered in several days' worth of stubble. He looked like he'd forgotten how to sleep, how to eat, how to care about anything at all. He stared at Grace like she was a ghost. What in the... He stopped, his gaze dropping to the bundle in her arms, to the tiny face barely visible beneath the ragged shawl. Is that a baby? Yes, sir. Grace's voice came out steady despite everything. This is my sister Lily. She's 5 months old and she's hungry and she's cold and I don't have anywhere else to go. The man's expression didn't change. He stood there, blocking the doorway, blocking the warmth, blocking everything that might save Lily's life. Where's your folks? Dead, sir. Mama passed in October. Never knew my daddy. Relatives. My aunt sent us away. Something flickered in the man's eyes. Pain, maybe, or recognition. But his voice stayed flat. This ain't a charity house. I'm not asking for charity. Grace lifted her chin, calling on every scrap of dignity she had left. I'm asking for work. I can clean. I can cook. I can mend clothes and tend animals and do whatever needs doing. I'm strong, sir. Stronger than I look. You're a child. I'm 10 years old and I've been taking care of myself and my sister since Mama got sick. That's 8 months of cooking and cleaning and surviving. Grace's arms tightened around Lily. I don't need much. Just a place to sleep and some milk for my sister. I'll earn everything else. The man's jaw worked. He looked past Grace out at the blowing snow, at the dying light of afternoon, at the world that had clearly stopped making sense to him long ago. I can't take in strays. We're not strays, sir. We're people. He flinched. Actually flinched like she'd struck him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Grace could feel her strength fading, feel her legs starting to shake, feel the desperate exhaustion pulling at her bones. If he said no, she didn't know what she'd do. There was nowhere else to go. No more farms within walking distance. No more chances. Lily let out another weak cry. The man's eyes dropped to the baby again, and something cracked in his expression. Something he'd been holding together with wire and stubbornness, just like his gait. How long since she ate? Yesterday morning. A woman in town gave us some goat's milk, but it ran out. Yesterday? His voice sharpened. She's been without food for over a day. I tried, sir. I tried everything. But nobody would... Grace's voice broke. She forced it back together. Nobody would help us. The man stepped aside. Get in here. Now. Grace didn't hesitate. She stumbled through the doorway into warmth that felt like heaven, into a house that smelled like wood smoke and loneliness. Her legs gave out the moment she crossed the threshold, and she crashed to her knees on the wooden floor, still clutching Lily against her chest. I'm sorry, she gasped. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to... Stop apologizing. The man was already moving, crossing to the stove, grabbing a pot. When's the last time you ate? Grace tried to remember. The biscuit from the store owner 2 days ago. Before that, some scraps from a trash pile behind a hotel. I don't know, sir. You don't know. His voice was rough, but not angry. More like he was angry at something else, something bigger than her. You've been walking in this weather, with a baby, no food, no shoes. He stopped. Where are your shoes? Wore through 3 days ago. He turned around slowly, and for the first time, Grace saw the full weight of what she must look like. A skeleton of a girl with tangled hair and hollow cheeks, holding a bundle of rags that contained the only family she had left. Jesus Christ, he muttered. Please don't blaspheme, sir. Mama wouldn't like it. Despite everything, the corner of his mouth twitched. Your mama sounds like she was a particular woman. She was the best woman I ever knew. He turned back to the stove, his movements suddenly more purposeful. I've got goat's milk in the cellar. It'll need warming. You know how to feed a baby that young? Yes, sir. Been doing it since she was born. Then sit tight. Don't move from that spot until I tell you to. He disappeared through a door at the back of the kitchen. Grace heard his boots on wooden steps descending into darkness. She looked down at Lily, at the tiny face that was everything left of her mother, everything left of home. The baby's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow but steady. We made it, Lilybug, Grace whispered. We made it somewhere. The man returned with a jug of milk and a clean cloth. He poured some into a small pot and set it on the stove to warm his movements, efficient, practiced. Like he'd done this before. What's your name? He asked without turning around. Grace Lawson. My sister is Lily Ann Lawson. Lawson. He tested the word. Where'd you come from, be? Missouri. Mama brought us to Omaha after she got sick to stay with her sister, my Aunt Prudence. Grace couldn't keep the bitterness out of her voice. She didn't want us. Nobody just doesn't want a baby. She said we were too expensive, too much trouble. Her husband didn't want children in the house. Grace stroked Lily's cheek. She gave us bus fare to the county orphanage and put us on a coach. I got off at the first stop. The man turned around. You ran away from a coach. Yes, sir. Why? Because I heard what happens to babies in orphanages. Grace met his eyes unflinching. They separate siblings, send them to different families, sometimes to factories. I'm not losing my sister. Not ever. Something shifted in the man's expression. Something like respect. So you decided to walk across Nebraska in December instead. I decided to find a place where we could stay together, where I could work for our keep and Lily could be safe. Grace's chin lifted. This is the 14th door I've knocked on, sir. Yours is the first one that opened. The milk was warm. The man tested it on his wrist, the gesture so familiar, so practiced, that Grace felt her throat tighten. He handed her the pot and the cloth. Feed her. Then we'll figure out what to do with you. Grace didn't argue. She dipped the cloth in the milk and brought it to Lily's lips. The baby latched on weakly at first, then with growing strength as she realized food had finally come. Her small body relaxed, her tiny fists unclenching. Grace felt tears streaming down her face. She couldn't stop them, couldn't even try. All the fear, all the exhaustion, all the desperate hope of the past 3 days came pouring out in silent sobs. She's eating, she gasped. She's really eating. The man said nothing. He just stood there watching his weathered face unreadable. When Lily had drunk her fill and fallen into a proper sleep, the good kind with pink cheeks and steady breathing, Grace finally looked up. Thank you, sir. I don't know how to... Samuel. His voice was gruff. Name's Samuel McAllister. You can stop calling me sir. Thank you, Mr. McAllister. Just Samuel. He grabbed a chair and set it by the stove. Sit down before you fall down. Grace obeyed, sinking into the chair with Lily still cradled against her chest. The warmth of the stove seeped into her frozen bones, and for the first time in days, she felt something other than fear. Samuel moved around the kitchen, pulling out bread and dried meat and a jar of preserves. He set a plate in front of her without ceremony. Eat. Slow. Don't make yourself sick. Grace picked up the bread with trembling fingers. The first bite was so good she almost cried again. I meant what I said, she managed between mouthfuls. About working. I'm not looking for charity. I heard you the first time. I just want you to know I'll earn my keep. Whatever you need done, I can do it. Samuel sat down across from her, his elbows on the table, his eyes studying her face. You've got frostbite on your feet. Probably on your fingers, too. You're half-starved and exhausted. That baby needs proper feeding every few hours for the next several days just to get her strength back. Grace's stomach dropped. Are you saying you won't let us stay? I'm saying you're in no condition to work. Not today, not tomorrow, maybe not for a week. Then I'll owe you. I'll work twice as hard when I'm better. Stop. Samuel held up a hand. Just stop. Grace fell silent, her heart pounding. Samuel rubbed his face with both hands, looking older than his years. I haven't had another person in this house in 3 years. Haven't wanted one. Haven't needed one. Then why did you let us in? The question hung in the air between them. Samuel's eyes dropped to Lily sleeping peacefully in Grace's arms. Because my wife would have skinned me alive if I'd left you out in that snow. Your wife, Eleanor, she died 3 years ago. I'm sorry. Me too. Samuel stood abruptly, moving to the window. I had a son too, Thomas. He left 5 years ago. We had a fight, said things we couldn't take back. Haven't seen him since. Grace understood then, understood the empty house and the broken gate, and the look in his eyes like he'd forgotten how to be alive. You lost everyone. Yes. So did I. Samuel turned around. Their eyes met two broken people recognizing something in each other. Grief. Loneliness. The desperate, stubborn will to keep breathing, even when breathing hurt. 1 week, Samuel said finally. You can stay 1 week. That'll give you time to heal up, get your strength back, figure out where you're going next. And after that, we'll see. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even hope. But it was something. Thank you, Samuel. He grunted, turning away. There's a room at the back of the house. He stopped, swallowed hard. It was my son's room. You and the baby can sleep there. Grace stood carefully, Lily still sleeping against her chest. I truly am grateful. For everything. Don't be grateful yet. You haven't seen the room. But when Samuel opened the door, Grace felt her breath catch. The room was small but clean, with a real bed covered in a faded quilt, a window that looked out over the snow-covered fields, and a wooden trunk against one wall. On the nightstand sat a photograph, a young man with dark hair and serious eyes standing next to a woman with a gentle smile. That's Thomas, Samuel said from behind her. And Eleanor. They're beautiful. They were. Grace turned to face him, this broken man who had opened his door when everyone else had closed theirs. I won't let you down, Samuel. Whatever happens, I want you to know that. His expression flickered, something crossing his face too quickly to name. Just get some rest. We'll talk more in the morning. He pulled the door closed behind him, and Grace stood alone in the quiet room with her sleeping sister. She crossed to the bed and laid Lily down, gently tucking the quilt around her tiny body. The baby's face was peaceful now, content, and Grace felt tears slipping down her cheeks again. We're safe, Lilybug, she whispered. For now, we're safe. She climbed onto the bed next to her sister, too exhausted to take off her coat, too tired to do anything but curl around Lily's small form and let her eyes close. Outside, the wind howled, and the snow fell, burying the world in white. Inside, in a room that had been empty for 5 years, 2 lost girls slept their first peaceful sleep in days. And down the hall, Samuel McAllister sat by the dying fire, with his head in his hands, wondering what he had just done. The next morning came gray and cold. Grace woke before dawn, her body's habit from months of caring for Lily overriding her exhaustion. The baby was still sleeping, her breathing steady, her color better than it had been in days. Grace slipped out of bed, quietly wincing as her feet touched the cold floor. The pain was sharper now, which meant feeling was returning. Samuel had been right about the frostbite. She could see it now in the dim light, the angry red and white patches on her toes, the blisters forming on her heels. She ignored it. There was work to do. The kitchen was dark when she crept down the hallway, but she could hear movement in another part of the house. Samuel probably doing whatever farmers did before sunrise. Grace found matches and lit the stove, coaxing the coals back to life. She located the coffee and the pot, working from memory of her mother's kitchen, her aunt's kitchen, all the kitchens where she'd learned to make herself useful. By the time Samuel appeared in the doorway, the coffee was ready and Grace was wiping down the table. He stopped dead. What are you doing? Making coffee. Grace didn't look up from her work. And cleaning. This table's got a month of dust on it. I told you to rest. I rested. She finally met his eyes. And now I'm earning my keep. Samuel's jaw tightened. Your feet. Will heal faster if I keep moving. That's what Mama always said. Your mama ever have frostbite? No, but she had plenty of other things. She worked through all of them. Something in Samuel's expression shifted. Not quite approval, but close to it. He moved past her to pour himself coffee, his movements stiff and careful. The baby. Still sleeping. She'll wake up hungry soon. Milk's warming on the back of the stove. Grace looked at the pot she hadn't noticed, the one already sitting over low heat. Samuel had gotten up before her, had already started preparing for Lily. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't mention it. He sat down at the table, wrapping his hands around the coffee cup. You always wake up this early? Lily needs feeding every 4 hours. After a while, your body just knows. Even when you're half dead from walking 40 miles? Especially then. Grace finished wiping the table and hung up the rag. Babies don't care if you're tired. They just need what they need. Samuel studied her over the rim of his cup. How'd you end up the one taking care of her? You said your mama got sick, but that was before the baby was born. Mama got sick right after Lily came. The birth was hard. She never really recovered. Grace's voice stayed steady, but her hands found the edge of the counter and gripped tight. I did everything I could. Kept the house clean, cooked the meals, took care of Lily so Mama could rest. But it wasn't enough. Some things aren't about enough. I know. Grace turned around to face him. I know it wasn't my fault. Mama told me that at the end. Said I'd done everything right, that she was proud of me, that I had to keep going no matter what. Her voice cracked. But sometimes knowing something and feeling it are two different things. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. My wife said something similar, he finally said. At the end. Told me not to blame myself for things I couldn't control. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Didn't listen to her then. Still not sure I listened to her now. Maybe that's why you opened the door. What do you mean? Grace chose her words carefully. Maybe you needed to help someone else to stop punishing yourself. Samuel's cup stopped halfway to his mouth. He stared at her, this 10-year-old girl who spoke like she'd lived 100 years. You're too young to be this wise. And you're too stubborn to be this kind. But here we are. Despite everything, Samuel's mouth twitched. Almost a smile, but not quite. You've got a mouth on you. Mama said that too, usually right before she told me to hush. Smart woman. The smartest. Lily's cry pierced the quiet, thin, and hungry. Grace moved immediately, heading for the bedroom, but Samuel's voice stopped her. I'll get the milk. You get the baby. They worked together in the gray dawn light, two strangers falling into a rhythm that felt strangely natural. Grace fed Lily while Samuel made breakfast, simple food, eggs and bread, and more of the preserves, but more than Grace had eaten in weeks. When Lily was fed and changed and sleeping again, Grace looked at Samuel across the table. What needs doing today? Nothing you need to worry about. Samuel. She said his name firmly, like her mother might have. I told you I'd work. Let me work. He sighed, running a hand through his gray-streaked hair. Fine. There's mending needs doing. Shirts with torn seams, socks with holes. Eleanor used to handle that, and I never learned proper. I can do that. There's also the kitchen. Haven't really cleaned it since... He trailed off. Since your wife died. Yeah. Then I'll clean it. And the windows could use washing, and the floors need sweeping, and... He stopped himself, looking almost embarrassed. I let things go. It's all right. Grace's voice was gentle. It's hard to take care of a house when there's no one left to take care of it for. Samuel looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression cracked open. Not much, just a sliver, but enough to let a little light in. You sure you're only 10? Some days I feel like I'm 100. Yeah. His voice was rough. I know that feeling. They finished breakfast in comfortable silence. Then Grace got to work. By noon, the kitchen was unrecognizable. Grace had scrubbed every surface, washed every dish, swept the floor, until the old wood gleamed. She'd organized the pantry, cleared out the stale bread and the moldy preserves, and started a list of supplies they'd need from town. Samuel came in from the barn and stopped in the doorway staring. You did all this? Yes. Grace wiped her hands on her apron, one of Eleanor's that she'd found hanging in the pantry. Is it all right? Is it? He shook his head, seemingly at a loss for words. It looks like it did when Eleanor was alive. I hope that's okay. I know it might be hard seeing it different. No. Samuel's voice was thick. It's good. It's real good. Grace felt warmth bloom in her chest. I found the mending basket too. I'll start on that after lunch. After lunch. He moved to the stove where a pot of soup was simmering, soup Grace had made from supplies in the cellar. You made this? Mama's recipe. Well, close to it. I didn't have all the right ingredients. Samuel ladled soup into 2 bowls and sat down heavily. He took a bite, and something crossed his face, something painful and sweet all at once. It's good. Thank you. They ate in silence, but it was a different silence than before. Softer, less lonely. After lunch, Grace settled into the rocking chair by the fire with the mending basket, while Lily slept in a nest of blankets nearby. Samuel watched her work for a few minutes, her small fingers moving the needle with practiced precision. Where'd you learn to sew like that? Mama was a seamstress. She taught me everything she knew. Grace held up the shirt she was mending, examining her stitches. Said a girl who could sew would never starve. She teach you to cook too, and clean, and garden, and keep accounts. Grace smiled sadly. She wanted me ready for anything. Sounds like she knew she wouldn't be around forever. The words hung in the air. Grace's needle paused. I think she did. Her voice was barely a whisper. I think she knew from the moment she got sick that she wasn't going to get better, but she didn't want me to be scared, so she just prepared me. Every day she taught me something new. Every day she told me she loved me. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. She sounds like she was a good mother. The best. Grace resumed her sewing, blinking back tears. I miss her every day. Every single day. That never goes away. The missing. No. No. Samuel's voice was rough. But it changes. Gets easier to carry after a while. Like a stone you learn to hold in your pocket instead of your hand. Grace thought about that. I'd like to believe that. Give it time. Lily stirred in her nest of blankets, letting out a small cry. Grace was up immediately, lifting the baby to her shoulder, murmuring soft words. Shh, Lilybug. I'm here. Big sister's right here. Samuel watched them, something unreadable in his expression. She's lucky, he said finally, to have you. We're lucky to have each other. Grace met his eyes. That's what Mama always said. Family isn't about blood. It's about the people who show up. The people who stay. Samuel looked away, his jaw tight. My son didn't stay. Maybe he wanted to. Maybe he just didn't know how. That's generous. It's honest. Grace settled back into the rocking chair, Lily quieting against her chest. People make mistakes when they're hurting. Doesn't mean they stop loving each other. Just means they forgot how to show it. Samuel stood abruptly, moving to the window. His back was to her, his shoulders tense. You don't know what happened between us. No, but I know you kept his room exactly the way he left it. I know his picture is on your nightstand. I know you opened your door to 2 strangers because your wife would have wanted you to. Grace's voice was gentle. That's not a man who stopped caring. That's a man who doesn't know what to do with all the caring he's got left. Samuel didn't move for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. How do you do that? Do what? See right through people. Mama used to say I had old eyes. Grace smiled. Said I must have lived 100 lives before this one. Samuel turned around. His eyes were bright, but not with tears. With something else. Something like hope, buried deep and fighting its way to the surface. 1 week, he said. That's what I promised. I remember. Might have to make it 2. Grace felt her heart lift. Might have to. Samuel nodded once, gruff and awkward, and headed for the door. I'll be in the barn. Call if you need anything. Samuel. He paused, hand on the doorframe. Thank you. For everything. He didn't answer. But as he walked out into the cold, Grace could have sworn she saw him smile. The first week passed in a blur of work and healing. Grace's feet slowly mended the frostbite, fading from angry red to pink to normal skin. Lily grew stronger every day, her cries louder, her appetite fiercer. She started to gain weight, started to look like a proper baby, instead of a tiny fragile thing that might break at any moment. Samuel worked the farm during the day, coming in for meals, watching Grace with an expression she couldn't quite read. They talked more as the days went on, sharing stories about their lives, their losses, their hopes. Grace learned about Eleanor, about the quiet woman with the gentle smile, who had loved her husband and son with everything she had. She learned about Thomas, about the bright boy who had wanted to see the world, who had clashed with his stubborn father, until neither of them could see past their own pride. Samuel learned about Harriet, about the seamstress who had raised her daughter alone and taught her everything she needed to survive. He learned about the long illness, the difficult birth, the aunt who had looked at 2 orphaned girls and seen only inconvenience. "She'll come looking," Grace said one evening, Lily sleeping in her arms while the fire crackled low. "Aunt Prudence, she'll realize we're not at the orphanage and she'll come looking. Why would she bother? I don't know. But she will." Grace's jaw tightened. "She's not the kind of woman who likes loose ends." "Then we'll deal with her when she comes." Grace looked up, surprised. Samuel shifted in his chair, looking uncomfortable. "I meant, you don't have to face her alone, if she shows up. You'd help us, even though we're strangers." "Are you still strangers?" He met her eyes, and something in his expression made her heart clench. "Because you don't feel like strangers to me." Grace felt tears prick at her eyes. "No, you don't feel like a stranger either." Samuel nodded once, gruff and awkward, and looked away at the fire. But the words hung in the air between them, changing everything. At the end of the first week, Samuel made an announcement. "I'm going into town tomorrow. Need supplies." Grace looked up from the shirt she was mending. "Do you want me to make a list?" "Already got one, but I was thinking—" He paused, rubbing the back of his neck. "I was thinking maybe you and the baby should come. Get some fresh air. See the town. You want us to come with you?" "If you want." His voice was gruff, almost defensive. "Don't have to. Just thought, people should know you're here, in case they can help with the baby. Martha Brennan, she's got experience with infants. And there's a doctor in town case Lily needs looking at." Grace understood what he wasn't saying. If she was going to stay, she needed to be part of the community. She needed people who could vouch for her help, her stand with her if Aunt Prudence came calling. "I'd like that," she said quietly. "Thank you." Samuel nodded but didn't meet her eyes. "We'll leave at first light. Bundle up warm. Both of you." Grace watched him walk away toward his room, toward the solitude he'd wrapped around himself like armor. He was trying to help, trying to connect, trying to let them in. It wasn't easy for him. She could see that. But he was trying anyway. And that Grace thought was worth more than all the promises in the world. That night, after Lily was asleep and the house had fallen quiet, Grace crept out of bed and stood at the window. The moon was bright, casting silver light across the snow-covered fields. In the distance, she could see the outline of the barn, the listing fence, the crooked gate that had been her first sight of this place. 1 week ago, she had stood at that gate, with frozen feet and a dying baby begging for help. Now, she was warm, fed, safe. She had a bed to sleep in and work to do, and a gruff, broken man who was slowly becoming something like family. It wasn't perfect. Nothing was perfect. Aunt Prudence was still out there somewhere. Thomas was still gone, leaving a hole in Samuel's heart that might never heal. The world was still cold and hard, and full of people who would rather close doors than open them. But Grace had learned something important in the past 8 months. Hope wasn't about perfect. Hope was about possible. And here in this small farmhouse on the Nebraska prairie, possible was more than she'd had in a long, long time. She pressed her hand against the cold glass, watching her breath fog the window. "Thank you, Mama," she whispered into the dark, "for teaching me to keep going, for teaching me to be brave." The wind answered, rattling the shutters. And somewhere in the next room, Samuel McAllister stirred in his sleep, dreaming of the family he'd lost and the family that had somehow impossibly found its way to his door. The wagon creaked through the snow, its wheels cutting fresh tracks in the white blanket that covered the road to Miller's Crossing. Grace sat on the bench seat next to Samuel Lily, bundled tight against her chest beneath her coat, both of them wrapped in a heavy wool blanket Samuel had pulled from a trunk that morning. "Cold?" Samuel asked without looking at her. "A little, but it's nice to be outside." "Been cooped up too long?" "A week isn't that long." "Felt longer." He glanced at her sideways. "House has been different. Having you there." Grace wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a complaint, so she said nothing. She just watched the landscape roll by the endless white fields, broken only by occasional fence posts and the dark skeletons of bare trees. They'd been traveling for nearly an hour when the first buildings appeared on the horizon. Miller's Crossing wasn't much to look at, just a handful of structures clustered around a main street, but to Grace it might as well have been a city. After days of isolation on the farm, the sight of other people, other lives, made her heart beat faster. "Stay close to me," Samuel said as they approached. "Folks around here can be particular about strangers." "I know how to handle particular folks." "I'm sure you do, but let me do the talking first." The wagon rolled down the main street past a general store, a blacksmith shop, a small church with a crooked steeple. People stopped to stare as they passed. Grace could feel their eyes on her, curious and suspicious, measuring the stranger sitting next to Samuel McAllister. Samuel pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the general store and climbed down. He came around to Grace's side and held up his hands. "Give me the baby." Then climbed down. Grace hesitated. She hadn't let anyone else hold Lily since their mother died. But something in Samuel's expression, patient, steady, made her trust him. She transferred Lily carefully into his arms, watching his face as he adjusted to the slight weight. His expression softened. Just for a moment. Then it was gone. "She's light," he said gruffly. "She's gaining. Every day a little more." Grace climbed down from the wagon, her feet still tender, but healed enough to walk without wincing. Samuel handed Lily back, and she tucked the baby against her chest. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready." They walked into the store together. The inside smelled like coffee and leather and sawdust. Shelves lined the walls, packed with everything from canned goods to bolts of fabric to farming tools. A pot-bellied stove sat in the center, radiating warmth, and several people clustered around it. Their conversation dying the moment Samuel and Grace walked in. The man behind the counter was thin and balding, with spectacles perched on his nose. He straightened when he saw Samuel. "McAllister, haven't seen you in town in weeks." "Been busy." Samuel moved toward the counter, Grace following close behind. "Need supplies. I've got a list." The shopkeeper's eyes slid to Grace, then to the bundle in her arms. "Who's this Grace Lawson? She's staying with me." A murmur rippled through the people by the stove. Grace felt their stares like pinpricks on her skin. "Staying with you." The shopkeeper's eyebrows rose. "Samuel, you can't just... I can do whatever I want on my own land." Samuel's voice was flat, brooking no argument. "Now are you going to fill my order or not?" The shopkeeper opened his mouth, then closed it. He took the list Samuel handed him and disappeared into the back room. Grace stood very still, aware of every eye in the store fixed on her. A woman by the stove leaned toward her companion and whispered something. The companion nodded, her expression disapproving. "Excuse me." An older woman with gray hair and kind eyes stepped forward. "I'm Martha Brennan. I live about 3 miles east of Samuel's place." Grace recognized the name. Samuel had mentioned her, the neighbor who knew about babies. "Ma'am." Grace dipped her head politely. "Samuel's told me about you." "Has he now?" Martha's eyes crinkled with warmth. "May I see the baby?" Grace hesitated, then shifted Lily so the older woman could see her face. Martha leaned in, studying the infant with practiced eyes. "She's small. How old?" "5 months." And you're her sister. I'm 10. Our mama died in October. Martha's expression softened with sympathy. Poor lamb, both of you. She looked up at Samuel. You're doing a good thing taking them in. Wasn't planning on it. Samuel's voice was gruff. Just sort of happened. The best things usually do. Martha turned back to Grace. You need anything for that baby, you come to me. I raised 6 children and helped birth a dozen more. I know what little ones need. Thank you, ma'am. That's very kind. The whispered conversation by the stove had grown louder. Grace caught fragments. Stranger. No family. Living alone with him. Samuel heard it too. His jaw tightened. Something you want to say? He called out, his voice sharp. Because if you've got opinions about my business, I'd prefer you say them to my face. Silence fell. A thin woman with a pinched face stepped forward. We're just concerned, Samuel. You've been alone out there for 3 years. Now suddenly you've got a child living with you, and a baby. It's not proper. Not proper. Samuel's voice was cold. This girl walked 40 miles through a blizzard to save her sister's life. She showed up at my door half dead, begging for work. Not charity. Work. He stepped toward the woman, and she flinched back. She's got more courage in her little finger than most of the people in this room have in their whole bodies. So don't talk to me about proper. The woman's face went red. I didn't mean... Yeah, you did. Samuel turned away from her. Grace, come on. We'll wait outside for the order. He strode toward the door, and Grace hurried after him, her heart pounding. She could feel the stairs following them, hear the whispers starting up again the moment they stepped outside. Samuel stood by the wagon, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I'm sorry, Grace said quietly. I didn't mean to cause trouble. You didn't cause anything. His voice was rough. Small-minded people cause their own trouble. You just gave them something to talk about. Maybe it would be better if I stayed at the farm, when you come to town. No. Samuel turned to face her, his expression fierce. You don't hide because people are ignorant. You stand up straight and look them in the eye and dare them to say something. That's what Eleanor would have said, and she was right. Grace thought about her mother, about all the times Harriet had faced down landlords and creditors, and people who looked at a woman alone with a child and saw someone to take advantage of. My mama would have said the same thing. Then listen to both of them. The store door opened, and Martha Brennan emerged carrying a wrapped package. Grace, dear, I brought you something. She handed over the package. Some clothes for the baby. My youngest grandchild outgrew them. They're not new, but they're warm and clean. Grace felt tears prick at her eyes. Mrs. Brennan, I can't. You can, and you will. Martha's voice was firm but kind. We take care of each other out here. That's how we survive. Thank you. Grace clutched the package to her chest. Thank you so much. Martha smiled, then turned to Samuel. You bring these girls to church on Sunday. Let folks get to know them proper. It'll help. I haven't been to church since Eleanor's funeral. Then it's past time you went. Martha patted his arm. Eleanor would want you there. You know she would. Samuel's jaw worked, but he didn't argue. The shopkeeper emerged with their supplies, loading them into the wagon with minimal eye contact. Samuel paid in silence, then helped Grace up onto the bench seat. As they pulled away from the store, Grace looked back at Martha Brennan standing on the wooden sidewalk with her hand raised in farewell. She's nice, Grace said. She is. Her husband died about 10 years back. She knows what it's like to be alone. That's why she's kind to us. Probably. Samuel flicked the reins, urging the horses forward. Suffering either makes people cruel or makes them gentle. Depends on what's inside them to begin with. Grace thought about Aunt Prudence, about the hardness in her eyes when she'd put them on that coach. About the cold way she'd said, I've done my duty, the rest is up to you. What was inside my aunt? I don't know, but whatever it wasn't enough. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking through the snow. Lily slept peacefully against Grace's chest, oblivious to the drama of the morning. Samuel. Yeah. Why did you stand up for me like that in the store? He didn't answer right away. The horses plodded on their breath, steaming in the cold air. Because someone should, he finally said. Because those people in there, they don't know what you've been through. They see a stranger and they make up stories. Fill in the blanks with their own fears and prejudices. He glanced at her. I did the same thing that first day, when you showed up at my gate. But you let us in anyway. Yeah, I did. His voice was rough. And I'm starting to think it was the smartest thing I've done in years. Grace felt warmth spread through her chest despite the cold. Thank you for saying that. Don't thank me. Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep making that house feel alive again. I will. And come to church on Sunday. Grace smiled. Yes, sir. Don't call me sir. Sorry, habit. Samuel shook his head, but she could see the corner of his mouth twitching. Almost a smile. Not quite, but close. Progress. The farm came into view, the smoke rising from the chimney, the crooked gate standing open where Samuel had left it. It shouldn't have felt like home after only a week, but somehow impossibly it did. Grace. Yes. Samuel pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. He turned to look at her, his weathered face serious. What you said back in the store, about working, about not wanting charity. I meant it. I know you did. He paused, seeming to search for words. But here's the thing. This place, it's been dying for 3 years. I've been dying too, just slower. And then you showed up and... He stopped, swallowed hard. What I'm trying to say is, it's not charity if we need each other. It's just life. People helping people get through. Grace felt tears threatening again. She blinked them back. Mama used to say that. We're all just helping each other get through. Your mama was a wise woman. She was. Samuel climbed down from the wagon and came around to help her. But this time, instead of just holding out his hands for the baby, he offered Grace his arm, steady and strong. Welcome home, he said gruffly. Grace took his arm and stepped down Lily, secure against her chest. Home. Such a small word for such a big thing. Thank you, Samuel. Go inside. Get warm. I'll take care of the horses. Grace walked toward the house, the package of baby clothes clutched in her free hand. At the door, she turned back. Samuel was unhitching the horses, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked up, caught her watching. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the snowy yard. Then Samuel nodded once, and Grace smiled, and something shifted between them. Something important. She went inside, into the warmth, into the home she was slowly making theirs. The days after the trip to town fell into a new rhythm. Samuel worked the farm, repairing what winter had damaged, caring for the animals, doing the endless tasks that kept a homestead running. Grace kept the house cooking and cleaning and mending, tending to Lily, transforming the cold, neglected space into something warm and alive. They ate meals together, talked in the evenings by the fire. Samuel told her stories about Eleanor, about Thomas, about the early days when the farm was new and full of promise. Grace told him about her mother, about the little apartment in Missouri, about the dreams Harriet had had for her daughters. She wanted me to go to school, Grace said one evening, Lily sleeping in her arms. Real school, not just what she could teach me at home. She said education was the one thing nobody could take away. She was right about that. I know, but then she got sick and there was no money and... Grace shrugged. Dreams are easy to lose. Samuel was quiet for a moment. There's a school in Miller's Crossing. 1 room, 1 teacher, but it's something. Grace looked up surprised. I couldn't leave Lily. Martha Brennan might watch her during school hours. You'd let me go, even though it would mean less work around here. Samuel's expression was unreadable. I'd let you go because your mama wanted it, because you deserve it. He paused. And because Eleanor would have wanted it too. She always said children should have chances. All of them. Grace felt something crack open in her chest. Hope, maybe. Or something like it. Can I think about it? Take all the time you need. But Grace already knew what she'd decide. Some opportunities you didn't let slip away. Her mother had taught her that. Sunday came cold and bright, the sky a hard blue against the white fields. Samuel drove them to church in the wagon, all three of them bundled against the chill. Grace wore her best dress, the one she'd washed and mended until it almost looked new. Lily wore one of the outfits Martha had given them, soft and warm, and only slightly too big. Samuel wore a suit that had clearly been hanging in a closet for years. It was a little loose on him, like he'd lost weight since the last time he'd worn it. Grace suspected she knew when that had been. "You look nice," she said quietly as they approached the church. "I look like a fool." "You look like a man going to church with his family." Samuel's hands tightened on the reins, but he didn't correct her. The church was small white-painted boards and a steeple that leaned slightly to the left. Wagons and horses clustered outside, and people milled about the entrance, greeting each other, catching up on the week's news. They all stopped talking when Samuel's wagon pulled up. "Here we go," Samuel muttered. "Chin up," Grace whispered back. "Don't let them see you flinch." He shot her a look that might have been amusement. "Who's the adult here?" "Sometimes I wonder." They climbed down from the wagon together. Grace held Lily close, drawing strength from the baby's warm weight. Samuel offered his arm again, and she took it. They walked into church together. The whispers started immediately. Grace could hear them, feel them, but she kept her eyes forward, her chin high. Beside her, Samuel did the same, his jaw set like granite. Martha Brennan waved them over to a pew near the front. Come, sit with me." They slid into the wooden bench, Grace between Samuel and Martha. The older woman immediately leaned in to coo at Lily, and some of the tension in Grace's shoulders eased. "Don't mind them," Martha whispered. "They'll come around. And if they don't, then they're not worth your worry." The service began, and the whispers faded. The Reverend was an older man, tall and thin, with a gentle voice that carried through the small space. He spoke about community, about helping neighbors, about the bonds that held people together through hard times. Grace felt Samuel shift beside her. His hands were clasped tight in his lap, his eyes fixed on some point beyond the Reverend's head. She wondered what he was thinking, what memories were playing behind those weathered eyes. When the service ended, the Reverend made his way down the aisle greeting parishioners. He stopped when he reached their pew. "Samuel McAllister, it's been too long." "Reverend Webb." Samuel shook the man's hand. "This is Grace Lawson and her sister Lily. They're staying with me." The Reverend's eyes were kind as he looked at Grace. "I've heard about you, young lady. Quite a journey you've made." "Yes, sir." "And this must be little Lily." He peered at the baby, his face softening. "A blessing, these little ones. God sends them when we need them most." Grace thought about all the doors that had closed in her face, all the people who'd turned away. "Sometimes it doesn't feel like a blessing, sir. Sometimes it feels like a test." The Reverend nodded slowly. "That's true enough. But tests have a way of showing us who we really are." He glanced at Samuel, "And sometimes they show us what we're capable of becoming." Samuel's jaw worked, but he said nothing. The Reverend moved on, and they filed out of the church into the bright morning. People clustered in groups, talking, laughing. Some of them watched Samuel and Grace with open curiosity. Others looked away when they caught Grace's eye. "Mr. McAllister." The voice came from behind them. Grace turned to see a woman approaching, middle-aged, well-dressed, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the cold expression in her eyes. "Mrs. Harrison." Samuel's voice was flat. "I couldn't help but notice your guests." Mrs. Harrison's gaze swept over Grace and Lily with poorly concealed distaste. "It's quite unusual, a man of your age taking in a young girl. People are talking." "People are always talking. Doesn't mean they have anything worth saying." Mrs. Harrison's eyes narrowed. I'm simply concerned for the children's welfare. A farm is no place for... For what? Grace interrupted, her voice clear and steady. For orphans. For children who've got nowhere else to go. Mrs. Harrison blinked clearly, not expecting the girl to speak. Grace continued, her chin lifting. My sister and I have been walking for 3 days when Mr. McAllister took us in. 3 days in the cold with no food, no shelter, no help from anyone. Every door we knocked on, people like you closed in our faces. But Mr. McAllister opened his. I didn't mean. He gave us food. He gave us warmth. He gave my sister a chance to survive. Grace's voice shook, but she didn't stop. So, if you've got concerns about our welfare, Mrs. Harrison, maybe you should ask yourself what you did to help when we needed it. Silence fell over the churchyard. Everyone was staring. Mrs. Harrison's face went red, then white. She opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and walked away without another word. Samuel let out a breath. Well, that's one way to handle it. Was I wrong? No. He looked down at her, something like pride in his eyes. You weren't wrong at all. Martha Brennan appeared at Grace's elbow. That woman has been a busybody for 30 years. About time someone put her in her place. She squeezed Grace's arm. You did good, child. Other people were approaching now, their expressions curious rather than hostile. A farmer introduced himself, shook Samuel's hand, asked about the spring planting. His wife admired Lily, asked Grace about her mother. An older man clapped Samuel on the shoulder and said something about Eleanor something kind that made Samuel's eyes go bright. They stood there in the churchyard for nearly an hour, talking, connecting, being seen. By the time they climbed back into the wagon, Grace felt like something had shifted. Not all the way, not completely, but enough. That wasn't so bad, she said as they pulled away. Could have been worse. Mrs. Harrison might never speak to us again. That's a loss I can live with. Grace laughed, surprising herself. It felt strange laughing. Strange, but good. Samuel glanced at her. Been a while since I heard that sound in my house. Been a while since I had reason to make it. They rode in comfortable silence, the wagon creaking through the snow. Lily slept against Grace's chest, peaceful and content. The sky was bright, the air was cold, and somewhere behind them, a community was slowly opening its doors. Samuel. Yeah. Thank you. For taking us to church, for standing up for us. Didn't do much. You did the standing up yourself. But you were there. That mattered. He was quiet for a moment. My wife used to say that half of love is just showing up, being present when it counts. She sounds like she was wise. She was. Wisest person I ever knew. He paused. Until you came along. Grace felt warmth bloom in her chest. I'm not wise. I'm just stubborn. Sometimes that's the same thing. They reached the farm as the sun was climbing toward noon. Samuel helped Grace down from the wagon, and she stood for a moment looking at the house, the barn, the fields stretching out white and endless. It's starting to feel like home, she said quietly. Is it? Yes. She turned to look at him. I know you said 1 week, then 2. But Samuel, I don't want to leave, not ever. His expression shifted. Something cracked open behind his eyes, something he'd been holding together for a long time. I don't want you to leave either. Then let us stay, for real. Not just until my feet heal or the weather clears. Let us stay because this is where we belong. Samuel was quiet for so long that Grace thought she'd pushed too hard, asked for too much. But then he reached out and put his hand on her shoulder, heavy and warm. You already belong here, Grace. You and Lily both. I needed time to see it. And now I see it. Lily stirred against Grace's chest, letting out a small cry. Grace soothed her automatically, her eyes never leaving Samuel's face. We're family, she said. Aren't we? Yeah. His voice was rough, thick with emotion. I reckon we are. Grace smiled, and this time Samuel smiled back. A real smile, the first one she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, made him look younger, softer, more like the man he must have been before grief hollowed him out. Come on, he said, turning toward the house. Let's get inside. It's cold out here. They walked together toward the warmth, toward the home they were building piece by piece, day by day. Behind them, the gate stood open, waiting. The second week melted into the third. Snow fell, then melted, then fell again. The days grew slowly longer, and the nights grew slowly less cold. Grace marked the passage of time by Lily's growth, by the pounds the baby gained, by the strength returning to her tiny limbs. Samuel marked it by the changes in the house. The curtains Grace had hung. The bread she baked every other day. The way the kitchen smelled like food and life instead of dust and neglect. He marked it by the sound of her voice singing to Lily in the evenings. By the questions she asked about the farm, about Eleanor, about Thomas. By the way she looked at him sometimes like she saw something worth saving behind all the broken parts. He marked it by the letters he'd started writing in his head. Letters to his son, full of words he'd never said. Words like sorry and proud and please. You should send it, Grace said one evening. She was sitting by the fire, Lily in her arms, watching him stare at the blank paper on the table. Send what? The letter you're not writing. Samuel looked up sharply. I'm not. You've been sitting there for an hour. Your pen hasn't moved. Grace's voice was gentle. Whatever you want to say to him, just say it. It's not that simple. Why not? Because I don't know where he is. Because I haven't spoken to him in 5 years. Because... Samuel stopped, his voice cracking. Because what if he doesn't want to hear from me? Grace was quiet for a moment. Then she said, what if he does? He left Grace. He walked out and never looked back. Maybe he's been waiting. For you to reach out first. That's not Samuel. She said his name firmly, the way her mother might have. Pride is a cold bed partner. That's what Mama used to say. You can be right or you can be happy. But most of the time you can't be both. The words hit him like a fist to the chest. Eleanor had said something similar years ago. Before things got bad. Before he let his stubbornness drive their son away. I wouldn't know what to say. Start with the truth. Tell him you're sorry. Tell him you miss him. Tell him you were wrong. Grace shifted Lily to her other arm. The rest will come. Samuel looked at the paper, at the pen in his hand, at the empty space waiting to be filled. What if it's too late? What if it's not? He didn't have an answer to that, so he did the only thing he could do. He started to write. Dear Thomas, I don't know if this letter will reach you. I don't know if you'll read it if it does. But I'm writing anyway because I've spent 5 years not saying the things I should have said, and I'm tired of carrying that weight. I was wrong. About the farm, about you leaving, about everything. You weren't selfish. You were young and full of dreams, and I tried to crush those dreams because I was scared of losing you. In the end, I lost you anyway. Your mother died 3 years ago. I should have found you, should have told you. But I was too proud and too broken, and by the time I wanted to reach out, I didn't know how. There's a girl here now. Her name is Grace. She's 10 years old, and she showed up at my door with a baby in her arms and asked me for work. She reminds me of you in some ways. Stubborn, brave, too wise for her age. She's the one who told me to write this letter. She said pride is a cold bed partner. She's right. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't know if I've earned that. But I'm asking you to know that I think about you every day, that I keep your picture on my nightstand, that I never stopped being proud of you, even when I was too stupid to say it. If you can find it in yourself to write back, I'll be here. Waiting. Your father, Samuel. He sealed the letter before he could change his mind. In the morning, he'd take it to town, send it to the last address he had for Thomas, and hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Grace watched him seal the envelope, her expression soft. You did it. I did it. How do you feel? Samuel considered the question. Scared, hopeful, like I'm standing on the edge of something. That's how big changes feel. Grace smiled. Mama always said the scariest part is the first step. After that it gets easier. Does it? I don't know, but I'm willing to find out. Samuel looked at this girl, this child who had walked into his life and turned everything upside down, who had asked for work and given him hope, who had reminded him what it meant to be alive. Thank you, Grace. For what? For showing up, for staying, for... He searched for words. For not giving up on me. Grace's eyes were bright. You didn't give up on us either. I almost did. But you didn't. That's what counts. The fire crackled. Lily slept. Outside, the wind whispered through the prairie grass. And in the quiet warmth of that farmhouse, two broken people held onto the fragile thread of hope they'd woven together. The letter went out on a Tuesday morning, carried by the mail rider into a world that suddenly felt full of terrifying possibilities. Samuel watched until the rider disappeared over the horizon, then stood at the gate for a long time, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, wondering if he'd just made the best decision of his life, or the worst. Grace found him there an hour later, still staring at the empty road. He won't write back today, she said gently. These things take time. I know. Then come inside. Lily's been asking for you. Samuel turned, one eyebrow raised. Lily's 5 months old. She can't ask for anything. She fusses less when you're holding her. That's her way of asking. Despite everything, Samuel felt his mouth twitch. You're making that up. Maybe. But it got you to stop staring at that road, didn't it? She had him there. They walked back to the house together, and Samuel tried to push the letter out of his mind. There was work to do. Fences to mend, animals to feed, a farm to run. He couldn't spend every day watching for the mail rider like a lovesick fool. But he did anyway. Every morning, every afternoon, his eyes would drift toward the road, searching for a horse and rider, searching for news. Days passed. A week. 2 weeks. Nothing came. Grace watched him withdraw, watched the hope drain slowly from his eyes. She tried to fill the silence with chatter, with questions about the farm, with stories about Lily's small milestones. First smile. First laugh. First time grabbing Samuel's finger and refusing to let go. But she could see the doubt creeping back in the old familiar weight settling on his shoulders. He'll write, she said one evening 3 weeks after the letter went out. He just needs time. Or he threw it away. You don't know that. I don't know anything. Samuel's voice was bitter. That's the problem. Grace set down her mending and looked at him directly. You know what I know. I know that you're a good man who made mistakes and is trying to fix them. I know that your son loved you once, and love like that doesn't just disappear. I know that... A knock at the door cut her off. They both froze. Nobody knocked on Samuel's door. Nobody came to the farm unannounced. Even Martha Brennan sent word ahead when she planned to visit. Samuel rose slowly, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle mounted above the fireplace. Stay here, he murmured to Grace. Keep Lily quiet. He crossed to the door and pulled it open. A man stood on the porch, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes the color of strong coffee. He wore a city coat and carried a leather bag, and he looked like he'd been traveling for days. Samuel's heart stopped. Thomas. Hello, Father. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 5 years of distance. Samuel couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare at the son he'd thought he'd lost forever. Thomas shifted his weight. I got your letter. I see that. Can I come in? Samuel stepped aside, his legs moving on instinct while his mind struggled to catch up. Thomas walked past him into the house, his eyes sweeping the room, taking in the changes. His gaze landed on Grace, standing by the fireplace with Lily in her arms. "You must be Grace." Grace nodded, her expression cautious. "And you're Thomas. Samuel's told me about you. Has he—" Thomas looked at his father. "I wasn't sure he remembered I existed." The words hit Samuel like a slap. "Thomas, I'm not here to fight." Thomas held up a hand. "I've done enough of that. I came because—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I came because your letter was the first thing you've said to me in 5 years that sounded like the father I remember." Samuel felt his throat close up. "I should have written sooner." "Yeah, you should have. I was proud, stubborn, convinced you were right." Thomas's voice was flat, but something flickered in his eyes. "I know. I was the same way." Grace cleared her throat softly. "I should give you two some privacy. Come on, Lily. Let's go check on the chickens." "In the dark?" Samuel asked. "Chickens don't mind." Grace moved toward the door, pausing beside Thomas. "He's been watching the road every day since he sent that letter. Waiting for you. I thought you should know." She slipped outside before Thomas could respond, taking Lily and her quiet wisdom with her. Father and son stood alone in the firelight. "She's something," Thomas said finally. "She is. Your letter said she showed up with a baby, asked for work." "That's right." Thomas shook his head slowly. "And you let her stay. The man who couldn't let his own son pursue his dreams opened his door to a stranger." "She wasn't a stranger." The words came out before Samuel could stop them. "Not after the first day. She was just— She needed help, and I needed—" He stopped, unable to finish. "Needed what?" Samuel looked at his son, at the man Thomas had become, and felt all the words he'd held back for 5 years pressing against his chest. "I needed a reason to stop dying," he said quietly. "And she gave me one." Thomas's expression shifted. The hardness cracked just a little, revealing something softer underneath. "Mom died," he said. "You said in your letter. 3 years ago." "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me—" "I tried to find you. Wrote to the last address I had. Letter came back undeliverable. I moved. Several times." Thomas's voice was thick. "I should have told you. You didn't owe me anything, not after how we left things." "That's not true." Thomas stepped closer, his eyes bright. "You were my father. She was my mother. I should have been here. I should have—" His voice broke. "I should have said goodbye." Samuel reached out and gripped his son's shoulder, feeling the solid reality of him, the proof that he was actually here. "She knew you loved her. She always knew." "Did she know I was sorry for leaving?" "She knew." Samuel's voice cracked. "She wrote to you, didn't she, about a year after you left?" Thomas nodded. "She told me to come home. I was too proud." "Pride runs in this family." "Yeah." Thomas let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "I noticed." They stood there for a long moment, two stubborn men who'd wasted 5 years being angry at each other. Finally, Samuel spoke. "I'm sorry, Thomas, for everything. For trying to keep you here when you needed to go, for not listening, for letting my fear push you away. I'm sorry too, for leaving the way I did, for not coming back when Mom got sick, for being so damn angry for so long." "Where do we go from here?" Thomas looked around the room at the clean floors and the curtains in the windows and the signs of life that hadn't been there when he left. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I'd like to find out." The door opened, and Grace slipped back inside, Lily fussing against her shoulder. "Sorry, she's hungry." "It's fine." Samuel moved to take the baby, surprising both Grace and himself. "I'll warm the milk. You two should meet properly." He carried Lily to the kitchen, leaving Grace and Thomas standing awkwardly in the firelight. "So," Thomas said, "you're the girl who saved my father." "He saved us." We just showed up. That's not what it sounds like from his letter. Grace shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. We needed each other, that's all. That's not nothing. Thomas studied her face. How old are you, 10? 10 and a half. And you walked 40 miles in a blizzard with a baby. Didn't have much choice. Thomas shook his head. Most grown men wouldn't have made it. You know that, right? Grace didn't answer. She wasn't sure what to say. My mother would have liked you, Thomas said quietly. She always had a soft spot for survivors. Samuel tells me about her sometimes. She sounds wonderful. She was. Thomas's voice was thick. The best person I ever knew. Samuel returned with Lily, who was now contentedly sucking on a milk-soaked cloth. He settled into the chair by the fire, the baby cradled against his chest, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Thomas watched something shifting in his expression. You're different, he said. From how I remember. People change. Not you. You were always the same, stubborn set in your ways. Maybe I got tired of being that man. Samuel looked down at Lily, at her tiny face and trusting eyes. Maybe I figured out that being right wasn't worth being alone. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he moved to the chair across from his father and sat down heavily. I've been in Chicago, he said, working construction, saving money. For what? I wasn't sure at first, just felt like I should be building something, working toward something. Thomas met his father's eyes. Now I think maybe I was waiting. For you to ask me to come home. Samuel's throat tightened. I'm asking now. I know. And? Thomas looked around the room again at the home he'd fled 5 years ago. At Grace, standing quietly by the door with her arms wrapped around herself. At his father holding a baby like he'd been doing it all his life. I've got things to settle in Chicago, a job to quit, an apartment to clear out. Samuel's heart sank. I understand. But after that, Thomas paused. After that, I'd like to come back, if you'll have me. The words hit Samuel like sunlight after a long winter. He couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but nod, his eyes burning. Grace smiled, small and quiet. I'll make up the spare room. You don't have to. It's no trouble. She moved toward the hallway. Besides, your family. Family takes care of each other. She disappeared down the hall, leaving the word hanging in the air between father and son. Family. Thomas cleared his throat. She really is something. She really is. How'd you get so lucky? Samuel looked down at Lily, at the baby, who had come into his life wrapped in rags and desperation, who had somehow become as precious to him as breath. I opened a door, he said simply. She did the rest. The next 3 days were the strangest and best of Samuel's life. Thomas stayed sleeping in the room that had once been his, walking the land he'd grown up on, rediscovering the father he'd left behind. They talked, really talked for the first time in years. About Eleanor, about the farm, about all the things they'd never said when they had the chance. Thomas visited his mother's grave, a simple marker on the hill behind the house, and Samuel stood beside him while he wept. Grace kept her distance, sensing that this was something father and son needed to do alone. But she was always there in the background, keeping the house running, keeping Lily fed, keeping the fragile peace from shattering. On the third night, Thomas made an announcement. I need to go back to Chicago, settle my affairs. Samuel nodded, his chest tight. How long? A month? Maybe less. And then I come home. Thomas met his father's eyes. For good this time. You mean that? I mean it. They shook hands, then awkwardly embraced. It was stiff and uncomfortable and perfect. Take care of them while I'm gone, Thomas said, pulling back. Grace and Lily, they're important. I know. No, I mean really important. Thomas's expression was serious. That girl, she's special. Don't let anyone take her away. A chill ran down Samuel's spine. Why would anyone take her away? She mentioned an aunt in Omaha, someone who sent her away. Prudence Whitfield. That's the one. Thomas frowned. People like that, they don't stay gone forever, especially not when they think they've got a claim. Samuel thought about Grace's words from weeks ago. She'll come looking. Aunt Prudence. She'll realize we're not at the orphanage, and she'll come looking. I'll protect them, he said firmly. Whatever it takes. Good. Thomas gripped his shoulder. Because something tells me you're going to have to. The morning Thomas left, Grace stood on the porch with Lily in her arms, watching Samuel say goodbye to his son. Travel safe, Samuel said. I will. Write when you get there. I'll write. They stood there, two men who'd spent 5 years apart and 3 days finding their way back to each other. I love you, son. The words came out rough, unpracticed. Samuel couldn't remember the last time he'd said them out loud. Thomas's eyes went bright. I love you too, Dad. Then he climbed onto his horse and rode away toward the road toward Chicago, toward the life he was leaving behind. Samuel watched until he disappeared, then turned to find Grace standing beside him. He'll come back, she said. I know. You don't look like you know. I'm trying to believe it. Grace shifted Lily to one arm and slipped her free hand into his. It was such a small gesture, a child's gesture, but it anchored him somehow, kept him from floating away on the tide of fear and hope. Believe it, she said. He's coming back. We're staying. Everything's going to be all right. Samuel looked down at their joined hands, at this girl who'd walked into his life and turned everything upside down. How do you know? Because we found each other. Grace smiled. And that's not nothing. That's everything. 2 weeks after Thomas left, the trouble came. Grace was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when she heard the wagon approaching. It was too early for the mail rider, and Martha Brennan always sent word before visiting. Her hands stilled. Samuel. He appeared in the doorway, already reaching for his coat. I heard it. Are you expecting anyone? No. They went to the window together, watching as a hired wagon rolled up the long drive. A woman sat in the back, dressed in city clothes, her face pinched and cold. Grace's stomach dropped. It's her, she whispered. It's Aunt Prudence. Samuel's hand found her shoulder, heavy and warm. Stay inside. Let me handle this. But, Grace, stay inside. She nodded, though every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to grab Lily and disappear into the prairie. Samuel walked out onto the porch. His shoulders squared, his face hard. Prudence Whitfield climbed down from the wagon with the help of a man Grace didn't recognize. Her eyes swept over the farm, dismissive and calculating. Mr. McAllister, I presume. Mrs. Whitfield, can't say I'm pleased to meet you. Prudence's lips thinned. I see you've been expecting me. Grace said you might come looking. Didn't believe her at first. Figured any woman who'd abandoned children in winter wouldn't bother tracking them down. I didn't abandon anyone. I made arrangements. You put them on a coach to an orphanage in December. I did what I had to do. Prudence's voice was cold. Now I've come to collect what's mine. Nothing here is yours. Those children are my sister's daughters, my blood. I have legal rights. Samuel's jaw tightened. Rights you gave up when you sent them away. I've reconsidered. Prudence stepped forward, her eyes hard. The girls will come with me. Over my dead body. Grace couldn't stay inside any longer. She pushed through the door, Lily clutched against her chest. You don't want us, she said, her voice shaking. You never wanted us. So why are you here? Prudence's expression flickered. Grace, you're looking better. Because someone actually took care of us, fed us, kept us warm. Grace lifted her chin. Something you didn't bother to do. I had no choice. You had plenty of choices. You chose to send us away. This isn't the time for childish dramatics. Prudence's voice sharpened. You're coming with me. Both of you. Now. No. You don't get to say no. I'm your guardian. You're not her guardian, Samuel interrupted. Not anymore. Prudence turned to him, her eyes narrowing. What are you talking about? I filed for legal guardianship 2 weeks ago. Judge Morrison in the county seat has the papers. Samuel's voice was flat. As of now, Grace and Lily are in my custody pending a hearing. Prudence's face went white, then red. You can't do that. I already did. I'll fight it. You're welcome to try. They faced each other, two forces of will colliding. Grace watched her heart pounding Lily's small body warm against her chest. Finally, Prudence spoke. This isn't over, Mr. McAllister. Those girls belong with family, real family. And when I prove that in court, you'll have nothing. Real family doesn't abandon children in winter, Samuel said quietly. Real family shows up. Real family fights. I've done both. Prudence's mouth twisted. She turned to Grace, her expression cold. You'll regret this, girl. Choosing a stranger over your own blood. He's not a stranger. Grace's voice was steady now, her fear transforming into something harder. He's my family. And you never will be. Prudence stared at her for a long moment. Then she turned and climbed back into the wagon. I'll see you in court, she called as the wagon pulled away. All of you. Samuel and Grace watched until the wagon disappeared over the horizon. Then Samuel turned to her, his face pale but determined. We need a lawyer. Can we afford one? We'll find a way. He put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. Whatever it takes, Grace, I'm not losing you. Grace leaned into him, feeling his strength, his warmth, his fierce, stubborn love. You won't, she whispered. I promise. The fight was coming, but for the first time in her life, Grace Lawson wasn't facing it alone. The days after Prudence's visit passed in a blur of preparation and worry. Samuel rode into town the next morning and returned with news that made Grace's stomach clench. Prudence had already filed her petition. The hearing was set for 3 weeks out. Judge Morrison would decide everything. 3 weeks, Grace whispered. That's not much time. It's enough. Samuel's voice was firm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. We'll be ready. Martha Brennan arrived that afternoon, her face grave but determined. She'd heard about Prudence's visit from the wagon driver who'd stopped at the general store to water his horses and spread gossip. The whole town's talking, Martha said, settling into a chair while Grace poured coffee. Most folks are on your side, Samuel. They've seen how those girls have flourished here. Most folks don't sit on the judge's bench. No, but their testimony might help. Martha leaned forward. I'll speak for you. So will Reverend Webb. The Coopers, the Hendersons, even old Tom Richter said he'd come to court if it would help. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. They'd do that for us. Child, you've been here less than 2 months, and you've already become part of this community. Martha reached over and squeezed her hand. That counts for something. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. I don't know how to thank you, Martha. Don't thank me yet. We haven't won anything. She stood, brushing off her skirt. Now let's talk strategy. What exactly are we up against? They spent the rest of the afternoon planning. Martha had experience with the court system, her late husband having been involved in several land disputes over the years. She knew how these things worked, what arguments carried weight, what evidence mattered. Blood relation is powerful, she admitted. Judges don't like separating children from family, but they also don't like seeing children mistreated. If we can prove Prudence abandoned them, prove she sent them out into the world with nothing. Grace can testify to that, Samuel said. She'll have to, and it won't be easy. Martha looked at Grace, her expression gentle but serious. They'll try to twist your words, child, make you doubt yourself, make you seem ungrateful or difficult. Can you handle that? Grace thought about the long walk through the snow, the doors that had closed in her face, the desperate hope that had kept her moving when everything else had given out. "I can handle anything," she said. For Lily. The letter arrived 4 days before the hearing. Samuel was in the barn when the mail rider came. Grace took the envelope, her heart hammering when she saw the Chicago postmark. She ran to find Samuel waving the letter above her head. "It's from Thomas. It came." Samuel wiped his hands on his pants and took the envelope. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened it. Grace watched his face as he read, watched the emotions play across his weathered features. Hope, relief, something that might have been joy. "He's coming," Samuel said, his voice cracking. "He settled his affairs early. He'll be here day after tomorrow." Before the hearing. 2 days before. Grace threw her arms around him the way she might have hugged her father if she'd ever known him. Samuel stiffened for just a moment, then his arms came around her, holding her tight. "We're going to be all right," she whispered against his chest. "All of us." "Yeah." His voice was rough. "I'm starting to believe that." Thomas arrived on a cold, clear morning, stepping off the train at Miller's Crossing, with a bag in one hand and a thick folder of papers in the other. Grace watched from the wagon as Samuel walked toward his son. They embraced on the platform, awkward but real. Then Thomas turned and saw her. "Grace." He smiled, and it transformed his serious face. "You're looking well." "So are you." She climbed down from the wagon, Lily bundled against her chest. "What's in the folder?" "Insurance." Thomas held it up. "I've got a friend in Chicago, a lawyer. He helped me gather some information about Mrs. Prudence Whitfield." Samuel frowned. "What kind of information?" "The kind that might help us win." They rode back to the farm, Thomas explaining as they went. His lawyer friend had connections in Omaha, people who knew Prudence and her husband. The picture they'd painted wasn't pretty. "Prudence's husband, Walter, he's in financial trouble," Thomas said. "Bad investments, gambling debts. They've been selling off assets for months." "What's that got to do with Grace and Lily?" "Think about it, Father." Thomas's voice was grim. "Why would a woman who didn't want 2 orphans suddenly come looking for them? Why now?" Grace felt cold, despite the blanket wrapped around her. "She wants something." "She wants money." Thomas pulled a document from the folder. "I did some digging. Your mother Grace, your grandmother on her side, owned property in Missouri, land that passed to Harriet when the grandmother died. Mama never mentioned any land. She might not have known, or she might have been waiting until you were old enough to understand." Thomas handed her the document. "According to the county records, that land now belongs to you and Lily, both of you as Harriet's surviving children." Grace stared at the paper, trying to make sense of the legal language. "I don't understand." "Prudence does." Samuel's voice was hard. "That's why she wants you back. Not because you're family, because you're valuable." "It's not about the land itself," Thomas continued. "The property isn't worth much, just a few acres of farmland, but there's been talk of the railroad expanding through that area. If that happens, whoever controls your inheritance could sell to the highest bidder." Grace felt sick. "She doesn't want us. She wants what we can give her." "I'm sorry, Grace." "Don't be." She straightened, something hardening in her chest. "Now we know the truth. Now we can fight." The night before the hearing, Grace couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, Lily peaceful beside her, staring at the ceiling and trying to quiet the fear that churned in her stomach. Footsteps in the hallway. A soft knock. "Grace?" Samuel's voice quiet. "You awake?" "Yes." He pushed the door open and stood there, silhouetted against the lamplight from the hall. "Thought you might want company." "I'm all right." "No, you're not." He crossed to the bed and sat on the edge, his weight making the mattress dip. "Neither am I." They sat in silence for a moment. Lily made a small sound and settled again. "What if we lose?" Grace whispered. "We won't. But what if we do? What if the judge decides blood matters more than anything else?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Do you remember what you told me that first night when I asked why you came to my gate?" Grace nodded. "I said I saw the gate was broken but still standing. I thought you might understand." "I didn't at the time. Understand, I mean. But I think I do now." Samuel turned to look at her, his eyes bright in the darkness. "We're both broken, Grace. You, me, this whole farm. But we're still standing, and that's not nothing." "It's everything," Grace whispered. "It's everything," he agreed. "So whatever happens tomorrow, whatever that judge decides, you remember that. We're still standing, and we'll keep standing no matter what." Grace reached out and took his hand, her small fingers wrapping around his calloused ones. "I'm scared, Samuel." "I know, me too. But I'm also glad that I found you, that you let us stay." "I'm glad too." His voice was rough. "More than I know how to say." They sat there until Lily stirred for her midnight feeding, until the fear had faded to something manageable. Then Samuel stood, squeezed Grace's hand one more time, and went back to his room. Grace fed her sister in the darkness, humming the lullaby her mother used to sing. And for the first time since Prudence's visit, she felt something like peace. The courthouse was bigger than Grace expected, a solid brick building that dominated the center of the county seat. People milled about outside, more people than Grace had ever seen in one place. She gripped Samuel's hand as they climbed the steps, Lily in her other arm. Thomas walked beside them, the folder of documents clutched under his arm. Martha Brennan had arrived earlier with Reverend Webb, and they waited at the top of the stairs. "Ready?" Samuel asked. Grace nodded. "Ready?" They walked inside. The courtroom was stuffy and crowded. Prudence sat on one side with her lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. She didn't look at Grace when they entered, didn't acknowledge her at all. Good, Grace thought. Let her pretend I don't exist. I'll make sure the judge knows different. Judge Morrison called the hearing to order. He was an older man with sharp eyes and a stern face, and he looked at both parties with equal suspicion. Prudence's lawyer spoke first, painting a picture of a devoted aunt who had taken in her orphaned nieces out of duty and love. He talked about the difficult circumstances, the impossible choices, the pain of separation. Grace listened, her stomach churning. He made it sound so reasonable, so kind. Then it was their turn. Thomas stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that Mrs. Whitfield's motives are not as pure as her counsel suggests." He laid out the documents, the financial records, the property claims. He explained about the land in Missouri, about the railroad rumors, about the timing of Prudence's sudden interest in her nieces. Prudence's face went white, then red. Her lawyer objected repeatedly, but Judge Morrison allowed the evidence. Then Grace was called to testify. She stood slowly, handing Lily to Martha, and walked to the witness chair. Her legs felt like water, but she kept her chin up, kept her eyes forward. "State your name for the record." "Grace Elizabeth Lawson." "And how old are you, Miss Lawson?" 10 years old, sir." "Can you tell the court in your own words what happened when your mother died?" Grace took a breath. "My mother passed in October, sir. She'd been sick for a long time. After she died, my Aunt Prudence came to collect us. She took us to her house in Omaha." "And how long did you stay there?" 3 weeks, sir." "What happened during those 3 weeks?" Grace looked at Prudence, at the woman who had taken one look at her and seen only a burden. "My aunt told me I was too expensive to keep. She said her husband didn't want children in the house. She said she'd done her duty by taking us in, but she couldn't do more." "What did she do then?" "She gave me money for a coach ticket and told me to take Lily to the county orphanage in Lincoln." The courtroom murmured. Judge Morrison held up a hand for silence. "She sent you, a 10-year-old girl with an infant, to travel alone to an orphanage?" "Yes, sir." In December, in the middle of winter. Yes, sir. What happened next? Grace's voice steadied. I got off the coach at the first stop. I'd heard what happens to babies in orphanages, how they separate siblings. I wasn't going to let anyone take Lily from me. So you walked? Yes, sir. For 3 days. I knocked on every door I could find, asked for help. Nobody would take us in. Grace felt tears threatening, but she pushed them down. Then I found Mr. McAllister's farm. He was the first person who opened his door. And what happened then? He took us in, fed us, gave us a warm place to sleep. Grace looked at Samuel, at the man who had saved her life. He didn't have to. He didn't know us, but he did it anyway. Why do you think he did that, Miss Lawson? Grace considered the question. Because he understood what it's like to lose everything. Because he knew what it meant to be alone. And because he's a good man, even when he doesn't want to be. The courtroom was silent. Even Prudence's lawyer had stopped objecting. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Miss Lawson, if I rule in your aunt's favor, you'll be required to return to her custody. Do you understand that? Yes, sir. And how do you feel about that possibility? Grace looked at Prudence, at the cold eyes that had never held any warmth for her, at the hands that had pushed her away instead of drawing her close. Then she looked at Samuel, at the man who had taught her that family wasn't about blood. It was about showing up, about staying. My aunt doesn't want me, sir. She never did. She wants what she thinks I can give her. Grace's voice was steady. But Mr. McAllister, he doesn't want anything from me except for me to be happy, to be safe, to have a chance. That's quite a statement from a 10-year-old. I've had to grow up fast, sir. My mama always said I had old eyes. Judge Morrison studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. You may step down, Miss Lawson. The rest of the hearing passed in a blur. Martha testified about Grace's condition when she arrived at the farm. Reverend Webb spoke about Samuel's character, about the transformation he'd witnessed in the man and in his home. Even Mrs. Cooper, who'd been suspicious at first, stood up to say that she'd seen Grace and Lily in church, seen how well cared for they were. Prudence's lawyer tried to counter, tried to paint Samuel as an unsuitable guardian, a stranger with no legal claim. But the evidence was overwhelming. Finally, Judge Morrison called for a recess to consider his decision. They waited outside the courtroom, huddled together on a wooden bench. Grace held Lily close, feeling the baby's warmth, the steady rhythm of her breathing. You did good, Samuel said quietly. In there. What you said. I just told the truth. Sometimes that's the hardest thing. The doors opened. The bailiff called them back inside. Judge Morrison sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable. Grace felt her heart hammering against her ribs. I've heard the testimony, the judge began. I've reviewed the evidence, and I've reached a decision. He looked at Prudence first. Mrs. Whitfield, I'm troubled by what I've heard today. You took in these children, then sent them away with nothing but a coach ticket and a prayer. You showed no concern for their welfare, made no effort to ensure their safety. And now you come before this court, claiming you want them back, when the evidence suggests your motives are financial rather than familial. Prudence's face went pale. Her lawyer started to rise, but she pulled him back down. The judge turned to Samuel. Mr. McAllister, you're not a perfect man. You've made mistakes. You let your pride drive away your own son. But you also opened your door to 2 children who had nowhere else to go. You gave them food, shelter, safety. You gave them a home. He paused and Grace held her breath. The law places great weight on blood relations. But the law also recognizes that children deserve more than a name and a claim. They deserve love, care, a chance to grow. Judge Morrison straightened in his chair. Based on the evidence presented, I am granting full legal guardianship of Grace Elizabeth Lawson and Lily Ann Lawson to Samuel McAllister, effective immediately. Mrs. Whitfield's petition is denied. The courtroom erupted. Grace couldn't hear anything over the roaring in her ears. She was crying, she realized, tears streaming down her face as Samuel pulled her into a fierce embrace. "We did it," she gasped. "We won. We won," his voice cracked. "You're ours now, legally, forever." Thomas was there too, his hand on her shoulder, his eyes bright. Martha was crying into her handkerchief. Reverend Webb was shaking Samuel's hand and saying something about God's will. And across the room, Prudence Whitfield stood alone, her face twisted with fury and disbelief. She caught Grace's eye for just a moment. Grace held her gaze. Didn't flinch. Didn't look away. Then Prudence turned and walked out of the courtroom, and Grace never saw her again. The ride home was different. Lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from all of them. Grace sat between Samuel and Thomas Lilly, sleeping in her arms, watching the familiar landscape roll by. The fields she'd walked through in desperation. The road she'd traveled with nothing but hope. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we live," Samuel said simply. "We work the farm, raise the crops, take care of each other. Same as before. But different. Yeah, different." He glanced at her. Better. When they reached the farm, Martha and the others were already there setting up a celebration in the yard. Tables had been brought out loaded with food. Lanterns hung from the porch. Half the town seemed to have shown up. Grace stared at the gathering, overwhelmed. "They did all this for us?" "For all of us," Martha said, appearing at her elbow. "This community takes care of its own. And you're one of us now, Grace. Officially." The celebration lasted until the stars came out. Grace ate until she couldn't eat any more, accepted congratulations until her face hurt from smiling, and watched Samuel laugh with neighbors who had once been strangers. This is what family looks like, she thought. Not just blood, but choice, connection, love. When the last guests had gone and the dishes had been cleared, Grace stood on the porch with Lily in her arms, looking out at the dark fields. Thomas came to stand beside her. "Big day." "The biggest." "How do you feel?" Grace considered the question. "Safe," she said finally. "For the first time since Mama died. Maybe for the first time ever." Thomas nodded. "That's how home is supposed to feel." "Is that why you came back? Because it feels safe?" "Partly." He was quiet for a moment. "Mostly I came back because I realized something in Chicago. All those years I spent running away, building a life somewhere else, I was trying to prove I didn't need this place. Didn't need my father." He shook his head. "But the truth is, I was just scared. Scared that if I came back, nothing would have changed. That we'd be the same people making the same mistakes." "But you came back anyway. Because of you." Thomas looked at her. "Because you showed up here with nothing and turned everything around. If a 10-year-old girl could be that brave, I figured a grown man could manage it too." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm not that brave." "Yes, you are." His voice was firm. "You're the bravest person I've ever met." They stood together in the darkness, listening to the wind whisper through the prairie grass. "Thomas, yeah. I'm glad you came back." "Me too, Grace. Me too." Inside, Samuel was banking the fire for the night. He looked up when they came in, his weathered face soft with contentment. Lily asleep. Out cold. Grace settled into the rocking chair, the baby warm against her chest. "I think she wore herself out with all the excitement." "We all did." Samuel sat down across from her. "It's been a day." "It's been a life," Thomas said, settling onto the couch. "A whole new life starting right now." They sat together in the quiet house, the fire crackling low, the darkness pressing gentle against the windows. Three people who had been broken, finding their way to whole. "Samuel," Grace said softly. "Yeah, thank you for everything." He looked at her, this girl who had walked into his life and changed everything, who had asked for work and given him hope, who had reminded him what it meant to be alive. "Thank you right back," he said, "for not giving up. On yourself, on us, on any of it." Grace smiled, and it felt like the first real smile of her life. "I couldn't give up," she said. "I had too much to fight for." Winter loosened its grip slowly, the way it always did on the Nebraska prairie. The snow melted in patches, revealing dead grass and frozen earth, then retreated further as the days grew longer. By late March, the first green shoots were pushing through, stubborn and determined, reaching for the weak spring sun. Grace watched the transformation from the kitchen window, Lily balanced on her hip. The baby was bigger now, her cheeks round and pink, her eyes bright with curiosity. She grabbed at everything within reach, including Grace's hair, which she was currently trying to stuff into her mouth. "You're getting strong, Lilybug," Grace murmured gently, extracting her braid from tiny fists. "Too strong for your own good." Lily gurgled happily, completely unrepentant. Behind them, the kitchen was warm with the smell of baking bread. Grace had found Eleanor's recipe box months ago, had worked through nearly every card, but this particular recipe, a simple wheat bread with honey, had become her favorite. Samuel said it tasted just like the bread Eleanor used to make. Grace wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a bittersweet reminder. Maybe both. The door opened, letting in a gust of cool air and Samuel's heavy footsteps. He stomped mud off his boots and hung his coat on the hook, his movements easier than they'd been when Grace first arrived. Less weighed down. "Smells good in here." "Bread's almost done." Grace turned from the window. "How's the fence?" "Holding. Thomas is finishing up the last section now." Samuel crossed to the stove and poured himself coffee. "Should be done by nightfall." "Good." It was ordinary conversation. The kind of conversation families had every day about chores and meals and the small business of living. Grace had spent her whole life dreaming of ordinary. Now she had it, and sometimes she still couldn't believe it was real. Samuel sat down at the table, cradling his coffee cup. He watched Grace move around the kitchen, checking the bread, wiping down the counter, bouncing Lily on her hip. "You're good at that," he said. "At what?" "All of it." He gestured vaguely. "Taking care of things, making everything run smooth." Grace felt warmth spread through her chest. "Mama taught me well." She did. Samuel was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking." "About what?" "About the future. What happens next?" Grace's hands stilled on the bread pan. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've been here almost 4 months now. You've got guardianship settled, you've got a home." Samuel met her eyes. "But you haven't been to school, haven't had a chance to be a regular kid." "I'm fine." "I know you're fine. That's not what I'm asking." He leaned forward. "There's a school in Miller's Crossing. 1 room, 1 teacher, but it's real education. Math, reading, history. Your mama wanted that for you." Grace looked down at Lily. "I can't leave her." "Martha's offered to watch her, during school hours." "But, Grace," Samuel's voice was gentle but firm. "You've been taking care of everyone else since your mama got sick. Your sister, this house, me. It's time someone took care of you." Grace felt tears threatening. She blinked them back. "I don't know how to be a regular kid." "Nobody's asking you to be regular." Samuel smiled just a little. "Just asking you to try being 10 for a while." The door opened again, and Thomas came in, brushing dirt from his sleeves. He looked between them, sensing the weight in the air. "What did I miss?" "Samuel wants me to go to school," Grace said. "About time." Thomas grinned. "You're too smart to be stuck on a farm all day." "I'm not stuck. I like it here." "I know you do, but liking something doesn't mean it's all you should have." Thomas sat down across from Samuel, reaching over to tickle Lily's chin. "Besides, you'd be the smartest kid in that school. You'd probably end up teaching the teacher." Grace laughed despite herself. "That's not how school works." "Maybe it should be." She looked between them, These two men who had become her family. Samuel, who had opened his door when everyone else closed theirs. Thomas, who had come back from the edge of loss to find something worth staying for. They believed in her. Believed she deserved more than survival. More than just getting by. Maybe it was time she believed it too. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll try." Samuel's face broke into a real smile. "That's my girl." School started the following Monday. Grace walked into the one-room schoolhouse with her heart pounding and her hands trembling, convinced that everyone would see her for what she was: an outsider, an orphan, a girl who didn't belong. Instead, she found 20 children of various ages crammed into wooden desks, all of them staring at her with the same mixture of curiosity and wariness she felt herself. The teacher, a young woman named Miss Peterson, welcomed her warmly. "Class, this is Grace Lawson. She'll be joining us from now on." A few whispers, a few pointed looks, but no one laughed. No one sneered. Grace took her seat and tried to breathe. The morning passed in a blur of lessons and recitations. Grace discovered she was ahead in reading, behind in arithmetic, and somewhere in the middle for everything else. Miss Peterson didn't seem bothered by any of it. "You'll catch up," she said during the lunch break. "You've got a quick mind, I can tell." "How can you tell?" "The way you watch everything. Take it all in." Miss Peterson smiled. "Most children your age are too busy fidgeting to really see what's in front of them. You see everything." Grace wasn't sure if that was a compliment or not, but it felt good to be noticed for something other than her circumstances. At recess, a girl named Sarah approached her. She was about Grace's age, with freckles and red hair and a gap between her front teeth. "You're the one living with Mr. McAllister, right? The girl who walked through the blizzard." Grace tensed. "Yes." "That's the bravest thing I ever heard." Sarah's eyes were wide with admiration. "My pa said you nearly died, said you had frostbite on your feet and everything." "It wasn't that bad." "Liar." But Sarah was grinning. "Come on. I'll show you where we play at recess. There's a creek behind the schoolhouse, and if you're careful, you can catch frogs." Grace found herself smiling back. "I've never caught a frog." "Then you haven't lived. Come on." They ran off together, and for the first time in longer than Grace could remember, she felt like a regular kid. The weeks passed, and Grace settled into a new rhythm. School in the mornings, chores in the afternoons, evenings by the fire with Samuel and Thomas. Lily grew bigger every day, crawling now, getting into everything. The house rang with her babbling and her laughter, sounds that had been absent for too long. Samuel started taking on more work in town. His reputation spreading as a man who could fix anything, build anything, make broken things whole. He'd rebuilt the church, steps reinforced the general store's sagging floor, even helped the Hendersons raise a new barn after theirs burned down. "You're becoming a pillar of the community," Thomas teased one evening. "Next thing you know, they'll be asking you to run for mayor." God forbid. But Samuel was smiling. "I've got enough on my plate." Thomas had settled into life on the farm with surprising ease. He handled the heavy work, the plowing and planting, that Samuel's aging body couldn't manage alone. But he also traveled, sometimes taking surveying jobs for the railroad, bringing back money and stories and small gifts for Grace and Lily. "I found this in Omaha," he said one evening, handing Grace a book. "Thought you might like it." Grace turned it over in her hands. "The Adventures of Tom Sawyer." "I've heard of this." "It's good. About a boy who gets into trouble and has adventures." Thomas grinned. "Reminded me of someone." "I don't get into trouble." "Not yet. Give it time." Grace laughed and tucked the book under her arm. She'd read it that night by lamplight while Lily slept, and the house settled into its evening quiet. These were the moments she treasured most. The small, ordinary moments that added up to a life. Spring turned to summer, and summer brought long days and hard work. Grace helped with the planting, learning to drop seeds in straight rows to read the soil and the sky. She got sunburned and dirty, and happier than she'd ever been. Her 11th birthday came in July. She'd almost forgotten about it, the date having lost meaning in the chaos of the previous year. But Samuel hadn't forgotten. She woke to the smell of frying bacon and found the kitchen decorated with wildflowers. A small package sat at her place at the table wrapped in brown paper. "What's this? Happy birthday." Samuel's voice was gruff, but his eyes were soft. "Didn't think we'd let it pass without notice, did you?" Grace opened the package with trembling fingers. Inside was a locket, silver old but polished until it gleamed. She opened it and found two small photographs, her mother on one side, herself on the other. "Where did you get this?" "The photograph of your mother was in your things from when you arrived. Had the tinsmith in town make copies small enough to fit." Samuel cleared his throat. "The locket was Eleanor's. She'd have wanted you to have it." Grace couldn't speak. She held the locket against her chest and felt tears streaming down her face. "I know it's not much. It's everything." She threw her arms around him, holding tight. "Thank you. Thank you." Thomas appeared in the doorway, Lily on his hip. "Is she crying? It's her birthday. She's not supposed to cry on her birthday." "Happy tears," Grace managed. "The best kind." "Well, in that case, wait until you see what's outside." Grace followed them to the porch, wiping her eyes, and stopped dead. A horse stood in the yard. Not one of the farm horses, but a small chestnut mare with a white blaze on her forehead and kind, gentle eyes. "Her name's Penny," Thomas said. "She's yours." "Mine. Every girl should have a horse." Samuel's voice was rough. "Eleanor always said so." Grace walked down the steps in a daze. The mare nickered softly and pushed her nose against Grace's hand, velvet soft and warm. "She's beautiful," Grace whispered. "She's steady, good-tempered, perfect for learning to ride." Thomas grinned. "I'll teach you if you want." "I want." Grace stroked the mare's neck, still unable to believe this was real. "I want all of it." "Then it's yours." Samuel came to stand beside her. "All of it. The horse, the farm, the family. It's yours, Grace, for as long as you want it." She looked up at him, at this man who had been so broken when she found him, who had somehow put himself back together and helped her do the same. "Forever," she said. "I want it forever." "Then forever it is." The guardianship papers had made it official. The birthday gifts made it feel real. But the moment that changed everything, the moment Grace knew in her bones that she was truly home, came on an ordinary evening in late August. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset behind the fields. Samuel in his rocking chair, Thomas on the steps. Grace between them with Lily in her lap. The baby was drowsy, her head heavy against Grace's chest. "I've been thinking," Grace said into the comfortable silence. "About what?" "About names." She paused, her heart pounding. "About what I should call you." Samuel's rocking chair stilled. Thomas turned to look at her. "I've been calling you Samuel." Grace continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "And that's fine. It's your name. But I was wondering—" She swallowed hard. "I was wondering if maybe I could call you something else." Samuel's voice was rough. "What did you have in mind?" Grace looked at him, at the weathered face and the kind eyes and the hands that had fed her and sheltered her and never once let her down. "Pa," she said. "I'd like to call you Pa, if that's all right." The silence stretched. Grace felt her courage faltering, felt the fear of rejection creeping in. Then Samuel reached over and took her hand. His grip was strong, steady, warm. "I'd like that," he said, his voice cracking. "I'd like that a lot." Grace felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "Really? Really?" He squeezed her hand. "You're my daughter, Grace. In every way that matters. Have been since the day you walked through that gate." Thomas cleared his throat. "Does this mean I'm a brother now officially?" Grace laughed through her tears. "I guess it does." "Good," he grinned. "I always wanted a little sister to boss around." "I don't think that's how it works." "We'll negotiate." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. A family formed not by blood, but by choice, by need, by love. Lily stirred in Grace's arms, letting out a small cry. Grace soothed her, automatically humming the lullaby her mother used to sing. "She's getting big," Samuel said. "Too big." Grace smiled down at her sister. "She'll be walking soon. Then we'll really be in trouble." "I remember when Thomas started walking." Samuel's voice was distant, remembering. "Eleanor said it was like trying to catch a tornado. He was into everything." "Some things don't change," Thomas said dryly. They laughed, all of them, and the sound rang out across the quiet prairie. Laughter and love and the simple joy of being together. This is what Grace had walked 40 miles to find. This is what she'd fought for, hoped for, refused to give up on. A home. A family. A place to belong. Fall came with its harvest and its preparations for winter. Grace helped bring in the crops, her hands calloused, now her body strong from months of farm work. She rode Penny every day after school, racing across the fields with Sarah, who had become her closest friend. "You're lucky," Sarah said one afternoon as they sat by the creek watching the leaves drift downstream. "Having a family like yours." "I know." Grace pulled her knees to her chest. "I didn't always have them. I had to find them. That's what makes it special, I think. You chose each other." Grace thought about that, about the cold December day when she'd stood at Samuel's gate with nothing but hope and desperation, about all the doors that had closed before his opened. "Yeah," she said. "We did." The first snow fell in early November, almost exactly 1 year after Grace had arrived at the farm. She stood at the window watching the flakes drift down and felt the memory of that desperate walk pressing against her chest. Samuel found her there, her face pale, her hands gripping the windowsill. "You all right?" "Just remembering." He came to stand beside her. "Hard to believe it's been a year. Sometimes it feels like forever. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. That's how time works when you've been through something hard." Samuel put his arm around her shoulders. "The bad parts fade. The good parts stay." Grace leaned into him. "I was so scared that day. When I knocked on your door, I thought you'd turn us away like everyone else." "I almost did." "Oh, why didn't you?" Samuel was quiet for a moment. "Because you looked at me like I was your last hope. And nobody had looked at me like that in years." He tightened his arm around her. "I'd forgotten what it felt like to matter to someone. You reminded me. You mattered to Thomas, even when he was gone. I know that now, didn't know it then." Samuel sighed. "Grief does strange things to a man. Makes him blind to what's right in front of him. You're not blind anymore." "No." He looked down at her. "Thanks to you." Grace hugged him tight, pressing her face against his chest. "Thanks to both of us. We saved each other." "Yeah." His voice was rough with emotion. "I reckon we did." Christmas came with all its trimmings. Grace decorated the house with evergreen branches and red ribbons the way her mother used to do. Thomas brought home a tree from the woods, and they decorated it together, hanging ornaments that had belonged to Eleanor and new ones they'd made themselves. Lily, now 10 months old, watched everything with wide, wondering eyes. She couldn't understand what was happening, but she knew it was special. She clapped her tiny hands and laughed at the sparkling decorations. On Christmas morning, they gathered in the front room to exchange gifts. Grace had saved her egg money for weeks to buy presents: a new pipe for Samuel, a warm scarf for Thomas, a soft doll for Lily. In return, she received more books, a new dress Martha had sewn, and a wooden box Thomas had carved with her initials on the lid. "For your treasures," he said. "Everyone needs a place to keep their treasures." Grace thought about the locket around her neck, the photographs of her mother, the letters she'd saved from the early days when she was learning to trust. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick, "for everything." "Thank you," Samuel replied. for giving us something to celebrate again. They ate dinner together, the four of them, at a table laden with food and love. Grace looked around at their faces, at Lily, banging her spoon, at Thomas, stealing an extra roll, at Samuel, watching everything with quiet contentment. This was her family. This was her home, and she would never take it for granted. The years that followed brought changes, as years always do. Grace grew from a child into a young woman, her old eyes seeing more and more of the world. She finished school at the top of her class, and Miss Peterson said she could become a teacher herself if she wanted. Lily grew too, from a baby into a toddler, into a bright, curious child who asked questions about everything and feared nothing. She had no memory of the desperate walk that had brought them here, no knowledge of how close they'd come to losing everything. To her, Samuel was simply Pa, and Thomas was simply her brother, and the farm was simply home. "She's lucky," Thomas said one evening, watching Lily chase fireflies in the yard. "She'll never know what it was like before." "That's what we wanted," Grace replied. "That's what we fought for." "I know. It's just strange sometimes, remembering how it used to be." Grace looked out at the farm, at the fields that were green and thriving, at the gate that stood straight and strong. Samuel had rebuilt it years ago, but he'd kept the old wire coiled and hung in the barn. "So we remember," he'd said when she asked why, "where we started, how far we've come." She understood now. The wire was a reminder that broken things could be mended, that gates could open as easily as they closed. That hope was worth holding on to, even when everything seemed lost. "Grace," Thomas's voice pulled her back. "Sorry, just thinking." "About what?" "About the day I arrived, standing at that gate, not knowing if anyone would help us. And now," Grace smiled, "now I can't imagine being anywhere else." On the 10th anniversary of her arrival, Grace stood at the gate one last time. She was 20 years old now, a woman grown with her mother's determined chin and her own hard-won wisdom. Lily, nearly 11, stood beside her, and behind them Samuel and Thomas waited on the porch. "Why are we out here?" Lily asked, shivering in the November cold. "Because this is where it started." Grace looked at the gate, at the sturdy wood and iron hinges. 10 years ago, I walked through this gate with you in my arms. I didn't know if we'd live or die. I just knew I had to try." Lily was quiet, processing this. She'd heard the story before, but hearing it here, standing where it happened, was different. "You saved us," she said finally. "We saved each other." Grace put her arm around her sister. "All of us, together." They walked back to the house, to the warmth, to the family that had formed itself against all odds. Samuel hugged them both when they came in his arms, still strong, despite his years. Thomas had made hot cider, and the kitchen smelled like cinnamon and apples. "To family," Samuel said, raising his cup. "To home," Thomas added. "To second chances," Grace finished. They drank together, the four of them, and the warmth spread through Grace's chest, chasing away the last chill of winter. That night, after Lily was asleep, and Thomas had gone to his room, Grace sat with Samuel by the fire. He was older now, his hair fully gray, his movements slower. But his eyes were still kind, still full of the quiet strength that had saved her all those years ago. "Pa, yeah, thank you." Grace reached over and took his hand. "For opening the door, for letting us stay, for everything." Samuel squeezed her hand. "Thank you for knocking. I almost didn't. I almost gave up. But you didn't." "No," Grace smiled. "I didn't." They sat together in the firelight, father and daughter, bound not by blood, but by something stronger, by choice, by love, by the simple, profound act of showing up when it mattered most. Outside, the wind whispered through the prairie grass. The gate stood open the way Samuel always kept it now. "Why do you leave it open?" Grace had asked once years ago. "Because you never know who might need to walk through," he'd replied, "and I want them to know they're welcome." She understood now. The open gate was an invitation, a promise, a declaration that this was a place where broken people could find healing, where lost souls could find home. Grace had walked through that gate with nothing but hope and a baby in her arms. She'd found everything she'd ever needed on the other side, and that was the truest thing she knew. The question at the gate had been simple: can you give us shelter? The answer had changed everything. It had given a dying man a reason to live. It had brought a lost son home. It had saved 2 orphaned girls from a world that didn't want them. It had built a family from the wreckage of grief and loss. And it had proved that love was stronger than blood, that home was more than a place that hope could survive even the coldest winter. Grace Lawson had asked for shelter. Samuel McAllister had given her a home. And together they had found something neither of them expected: a future worth fighting for, and a family worth keeping forever.